how did you choose liquidations?
Liquidations choose
is
you.
it insolvency that
Yeah.
chose you?
So they're interchangeable. Liquidations generally refers to a corporate insolvency, whereas an individual liquidation would be a sequestration. You know, most accountants and lawyers don't set out in their careers to become insolvency practitioners, but they find you.
So you were able to save the company.
It's still there today. It's called Botswana Ash. It's exactly the same company that started life as Soda Ash Botswana.
I used to think that liquidation is a fate worse than death for a company.
Because a liquidator is personally responsible for any debt that is incurred from the date of liquidation. So what liquidators tend to be very careful about is not doing anything that might actually expose themselves personally, because, you know, we have to put security with the master
Yes.
on behalf of the creditors, so that if we don't do our job properly, or in fact we do it improperly where we do nefarious things, then there's a bond of security that can be used. When I was the liquidator of BCL, I had to put a bond of 100 million pula down. Now, that doesn't mean to say that I have 100 million pula.
This is Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom podcast. We enthuse, we energize, we inspire, and we empower entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs of all stripes in BW and beyond. Hello, Dumelang, and welcome once again to another exciting, invigorating episode of Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom podcast. We bring you, as I said, the creme de la creme. We bring you entrepreneurs who are impacting our community one way or the other. I have one such entrepreneur. His name is Nigel Dixon-Warren. You'll meet him momentarily. But a little bit of housekeeping. As always, we have to promote this book. We want to make it a bestseller. Let me be shameless in promoting it. It's available for $350 at Airport Junction. You can get it here in Gabs. And you can also get it from the first floor, Mogobe Plaza. Please support us, guys. In addition to that, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. We are fighting with these algorithms, guys. If you don't press that button, and my records say, YouTube says 66% of you enjoy viewing the program without hitting that button. So let me urge you and remind you to do so. And thank you for taking the time out. You're going to love this one. Be ready to be edutained. It's a mixture of entertainment and education. My guest is Dixon-Warren, but as always, I prefer that you introduce yourself. So can you go ahead?
Thank you very much, Momp, and thanks for having me on your show.
Yes.
Nigel Dixon-Warren. I was born here in Gaborone at Princess Marina, 1969. My parents had come to Botswana. My father was with the British government. They arrived at independence, 1966, to assist. And my father worked for government for the first 25 years they were here. He was in the building side as a quantity surveyor.
Yeah.
So he helped with the original infrastructure development. My mother was a teacher. She, in fact, went to Thornhill and became a teacher there. Then she became acting head of Thornhill, and then she was asked to open Northside School.
And I think she did that for the longest. Was she not the headmistress?
She was the founding head of Northside, and she was there until she retired in 1997. So about 24, 25 years.
She became an institution. Yeah.
Yeah, she had a strong personality.
And you went to Northside yourself?
I went to Northside myself. My brother and sister actually went to Thornhill. But I was one of the first kids in 1974 to go to Northside. And then from there I went to boarding school, as in those days we were all sent away to either the UK or to South Africa. So I did that. But then I ended up coming back to Marapula to finish my high school.
Okay.
And once I finished with my A-levels, not very successfully, I was then sent packing to the UK to go and learn a trade. So that's what I did in the UK. I was there for about 6 years.
You didn't
became
fail
an
your
accountant.
A's, did you?
Well, I was kicked out of one by the famous Mr. John O'Brien from his English class. He said I wasn't going to pass it at A-level, so he said to me, rather go. So then I was left with economics, and I think I was trying to do history.
Yeah.
And I came out just with economics. My mother was very upset as an educator.
Then I think you didn't need You didn't A-levels to get to tertiary.
No, I was doing A levels because I was expecting at that time to go down to the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa to do the typical training program for chartered accountants, because I always knew I wanted to be an accountant. But they didn't offer the accountancy A level at that stage at Marapula. So when I didn't do so well after 2 years, then I was provided with an air ticket and some money to the UK, and I was told to go and sort myself out and learn something. So I retook A levels when I got there, did accountancy, and then I trained to become an accountant, and I qualified in the UK, and then I came back with a wife and a young baby in 1994.
Does that include becoming chartered?
Yes, yes. So I did that while I was in the UK.
Yeah, and
So I arrived back here, and I took up employment with KPMG, one of the big audit firms, where I was for 25 years.
wow, as a partner.
Yes, I eventually was a partner, and eventually I was managing the office in Botswana. And then I moved on in around 2018 when I was involved very heavily with the BCL liquidation that we mentioned
we're going
earlier.
to talk about that
Yes.
in a while.
Yes.
So in terms of your career progression, what did you say? You went from being a junior accountant to what, and then?
So I came in, in those days when I qualified, in fact, I joined a fellow Motswana who also qualified same time as me, Norman Wright.
Yes.
We were I think he was the 10th and I was the 11th
He's been in
Motswana.
Shakawe for the longest.
Yes, he is in Chicago. So I think we were the 10th and 11th accountants to qualify since independence. There wasn't many accountants.
It was before they built the school.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
long-
In fact, at that stage, it was the Botswana Center of Accounting Studies, and I even did part-time lecturing for them. And then it became Botswana Accountancy College. I was on the board there for about 15 years, so I've been very involved in the development of the accounting profession, which we might be jumping a little bit. But when I was at Beaker, and I was for a period of 2 years, I was the president of Beaker. It was during that period that we introduced the Botswana Institute of Chartered Accountants qualification. So, in those days, I started as a relatively junior accountant, but because of the shortage of accountants, progression was quite quick. These days, when I mentor those that are coming after me, I say, be careful about going up too quickly, because you will find yourself unable to cope with the pressure at that level. And that's what happened to me. I was appointed a partner at KPMG in 1999, 5 years after I joined. Of course, then
rapid progression.
It was overly rapid.
5 years?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. These big audit firms, you need 10 to 15 years under your belt before you can take on that kind of role. But we were short-staffed in Botswana, so the opportunities came. I learned the hard way. It was tough. It wasn't as sexy as everybody thought it was.
I don't know whether this would be seen as a derision or as a compliment, calling you a bin counter. Because I'm going to ask you, what led you to be wanting to become a bin counter.
Yeah.
Depending on how you take the word.
Yes.
How do you take it?
Look, I think, when I was younger, I always was interested, and my mother always used to tell me, even at school, I had a thing for numbers. So yes, bean counter might be, so maybe I have a flair for numbers, but actually I wanted to become either a banker or an accountant or a quantity surveyor, which funnily enough, a quantity surveyor is really the accountant of the construction sector. That's, my father was but I tried he wanted me to become a QS. I went
but
and
what
worked.
influenced that? What is the numbers thing? Because
I don't know.
I've had people saying it's because I was dyslexic, I was this, I was
Yeah.
that. What was the trigger? Or did you have an uncle or somebody who influenced you?
No, it was simply just a love for numbers. I was no good at maths. I failed A-level maths because that maths is...
That's calculus.
It's calculus, it's weird stuff. I was okay with stats and the more general stuff. So no, I mean, obviously one of the motivating factors of becoming a professional accountant, as I'm sure the same for lawyers, etc.,
Yeah.
is that you also hope that you're going to have a decent living
Yes.
in terms of financial reward. So that was a big driving factor for me, like I think any young person. But I didn't become an accountant. You know, most people think of accountants that go and work for the big firms that they must be auditors. Funnily enough, I spoke to most of the big firms then at the time because, of course, the opportunities were plentiful. And the other firms said to me that they would welcome me as long as I came into the audit division.
Yeah.
And I didn't like audit.
What is it about auditing you didn't like?
Auditing, I found too backward looking. So you're the scorekeeper. You know, you're looking at what's historically happened and making sure that it's presented correctly in the financial information. I became for our firm.
Banks love auditors because they won't give loans without an auditor.
Correct.
Yeah, they love auditors.
Yes, yeah. There's a big market for auditors, but it's always looking at historical information.
Yeah.
And for me,
And you didn't like going backwards.
I prefer the inward investment. I used to look after anybody who would come to us looking to start businesses, to invest in projects. That was where I preferred to be.
Yeah.
And so I was always very passionate about tax.
Yes.
So that has been a particular area of interest for me over my entire career.
Some of my viewers, they may not appreciate the status of being chartered.
Yes.
So could you just explain that? What does it take to be chartered, and what does it actually mean when you're chartered?
Yes. So to be a chartered accountant is effectively, it's beyond getting your normal tertiary degree program. So the expectation certainly these days is that you will have your tertiary degree, whether it's a Bachelor of Commerce or a Bachelor of Accounting. Then you go and you write and prepare for a number of professional examinations, which can be spread over a 2 to 3 year period. And at the same time, you're required to do a minimum of 3 years supervised training, practical experience in the workplace. And then another chartered accountant has to sign off under their signature to say, I'm happy
supervision or
that
tutelage,
this
whatever.
person is now able to be considered
So
a
is it
chartered
like
accountant.
similar to the lawyers having pupillage
Correct.
for a year or
Correct.
something? Is it a
Correct.
similar length of time?
It is. Ours is 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, I think Beaker operates on a minimum of 450 days that must be completed before you can be considered.
365. That's about a year and a half.
But
then you exclude
it's
the
intended
weekends.
to go for 3 years.
Yeah.
Because in that period you also got to go on study leave, which doesn't count to your 450 days.
Yeah.
You got to write your exams. So it's
Tell
it's
us
quite those that have been through it will tell
Yeah.
you it's quite a tough process. Once you're there, you're very pleased.
Tell us about your KPMG experience. Was KPMG not one of the big fours then? Or the big three? I can't remember.
Yeah, in those days, I think they were called the Big Six, even when in those days. KPMG was actually probably the smallest of what was called the big international firms. It was only arrived in
It
Botswana.
included the famous Anderson and Anderson in that list.
Yes.
And then Coopers and Lybrand.
So Coopers and Lybrand and Pricewaterhouse merged together to become PwC.
Yes.
KPMG did try and merge when there was super mergers going on. KPMG actually was in fact the first global super merger of an American firm and a European firm.
Pete Marwick?
Pete Marwick, McClintock, as they used to call it.
I kind of remember.
And then I think in the US it was... But it's all the firms basically consolidated.
Yeah.
And KPMG was the first of the sort of international firms to consolidate. Then they were followed quite quickly by Deloitte's.
Because I assume those KPMG are the initials of the
Correct.
members,
They were
including
Kleinfeld,
Pete
Piet Marwick, Khudula.
Khudula.
Yeah. So,
Even as a
or in
guttural
Botswana,
name,
we were
Khudula,
accused
that's-
of keep playing more golf.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yes, it was one of the
like that, keep
recognized
playing more golf.
one of the recognized international firms. When I joined, it was a very small practice. There were 15 people there in total, 15 to 20 people. By the time I left in 2018, we were about 120 people, similar size to the other firms.
You're partners with my friend Norman Wright.
Yes.
How was the
at the
experience?
beginning?
Yeah.
Yes. Look, Norman and I became partners together. So we went up we followed the same route. He remained in audit. I used to look after tax and advisory side. We both made it to partnership. After about 2 years, he decided that he wasn't so keen on being an audit partner for the rest of his life. So he took an early jump and went into commerce after that.
Yeah.
And
Started his
left
own.
the firm. So, but I remained with the firm and
Yeah.
carried on. Yeah.
But of course, you gravitated towards liquidation. If I'm not correct. If I'm correct, how did you choose liquidations?
Liquidations
And
choose
is
you.
it insolvency that
Yes.
chose you?
So they're interchangeable. Liquidations generally refers to a corporate insolvency, whereas an individual liquidation would be a sequestration.
Whereas bankruptcy is?
Bankruptcy is a US term for the same thing. So your terminology changes depending on which country you're in. But they all mean similar things. It's basically you have to go into administration where somebody independent now needs to manage your affairs, whether you're a corporate or an individual, for the benefit of the creditors. Because generally, those are the people that have lost out because you haven't paid their bills, etc.
Administration, you're referring to judicial management.
So judicial management is a form of administration. So is liquidation, sequestration. They're all forms of what we call administration.
You'll have to teach us. You'll have to educate us.
So, most accountants and lawyers don't set out in their careers to become insolvency practitioners. But they find you. And the first one found me because KPMG, through the then managing partner, a gentleman by the name of Tom Piper, he was asked to take on the liquidation of the very recently established Soda Ash Botswana up in Supan, which was a brand new facility that had been put up between Anglo-American and AECI and the Botswana government to exploit the
Salt.
the very rich saline brine deposits in the pans where we produce soda ash, and we are a massive supplier now of soda ash for this part of the world. At the time, the Americans were not very happy because they had also been selling all their soda ash into Southern Africa. So there was a bit of a trade, not a trade war, but a competition. And soda ash unfortunately went into liquidation, very early stage of its life.
What triggered it?
Basically, the market
Don't you
prices
have-
dropped.
That doesn't have to be, correct me if I'm wrong, don't you have to be in debt or unable
Yes.
to pay your... But
That's
what triggered
exactly
that
it. So that would be it, is that the mine was unable, because the prices of its products, because the American, and I should be careful, but the Americans were dumping their excess soda ash into the Southern African market, which decreased the prices, and the company could no longer sell enough to even pay its debts, pay its salaries. So it was placed into liquidation. But it was my first experience then. Sometimes people call liquidators the undertaker because you just come in and you close everything down and you sell what you can and you pay whatever money you can get to the creditors. This particular
why
one.
did you choose liquidation instead of judicial management? What are the
No,
factors?
you see, that would have been a decision at the time of the creditors. So the liquidator or the judicial manager is a
It's
product.
not the decision of whoever goes to court first.
Yeah. So yes. So
Because
essentially,
you
it
can get it
requires a creditor who hasn't been paid their money might decide, you know what, I'm going to court because.
But he chooses between liquidation and judicial management.
In fact, the laws require you to first consider judicial management as whether it's an appropriate candidate for judicial management. And if it's not, generally because it's fatally insolvent, then liquidation occurs.
Okay.
So for judicial management, it is actually...
And all this is governed by the Companies Act.
Yes, and the Insolvency Act.
Okay.
Yes, which can often cause a bit of confusion because we have a 1946 Insolvency Act, which is still the fundamental provisions of insolvency in Botswana. And then we, of course, have the Companies Act, which has its own provisions relating to liquidation and judicial management. But you always have to look back at the insolvency as well for certain procedures that you need to do. So yeah, my first experience was
Yeah.
Soda Ash Botswana. The liquidator, Tom Piper, kept it running operationally. So he borrowed some
Without
money from the
necessarily going
same
for-
creditors
You
without
can
closing
do that
it. Yeah,
without
yeah.
judicial management?
Yes. In fact, judicial management is exactly intended to allow for a company to be independently managed
Yes.
out of its problems.
Mm-hmm.
So at the time, I think judicial management was, whether
so you
it was
were
considered
working
or not.
under Piper
Yes.
as an
So
assistant.
I was an
of sorts.
assistant to him.
Okay.
Yes.
Which
yes.
meant running around collecting.
I lived up at Suapan for 4 months. Basically looking after the day-to-day liquidation requirements, dealing
Yeah.
with creditors, helping to keep the operations running because you have to have a separate bank account as a liquidator, but we were having to pay supplies. And it did so well that the creditors came back and they said, you know what, let's restructure this and we'll change some ownership, we'll take some equity for debt, and well, of course, and ever since then, the only unfortunate things that have happened to it have been natural disasters like floods, which have occasionally impacted on the operations.
So
but
you
as
were
far as I'm
able
aware,
to save the company.
it's still there today. It's called Botswana Ash. It's exactly the same company that started life as Soda Ash
Well,
Botswana.
I used to think that liquidation is a fate worse than death for a company.
Generally, it is. Generally, it is. But there are occasions. For example, at the moment, I'm a liquidator of a farming operation, and within the court order, I was given permission to consider actually continuing to run the farming operations if I felt it would be beneficial to the creditors.
So
And I'm doing exactly that.
To what extent does that fate depend entirely on the skill, the temperament, and the attitude of the liquidator?
Absolutely. Huge. So I will give you an example. I was approached in about 10 years ago, 9 years ago, I was asked whether I would take on the liquidation of KFC in Botswana. Can you imagine? The chicken place going into liquidation. And the creditors had spoken to one or two other people before they spoke to me. And the first question they asked me, they said, will you keep the stores open? Because we are worried about our brand, because obviously one of the big creditors was KFC itself, the franchisor. And they said, we want somebody who's prepared to work with us to keep the stores open. And I said, well...
Isn't that judicial management?
Yes.
Excuse my ignorance.
Yes.
Yeah.
So judicial management is not used as much as it should be. The reason for that is that the judicial management provisions are sometimes a bit confusing, sometimes unrealistic or impractical. The way they've been drafted, they cause a lot of potential legal problems.
So it might even be advisable or prudent to go the route of liquidation and then apply the concept of judicial management.
That is indeed what does sometimes happen. And in the case of KFC, unfortunately, no matter what could be sold in terms of, and what we managed to do was to keep it open. We reopened all the stores that had closed. We restocked them. We borrowed some money from the bank. We got it up and running, and we managed to sell it as a going concern. Unfortunately, because what it could be sold for was far less than the actual debts that were due, the company itself still went into liquidation. So the company itself sold its asset, being a business, after we took about 18 months to sell it. And today now I think the stores have almost doubled in number.
How did they suffer? How did they avoid suffering reputationally? Is it the skill of the liquidator?
Well, I think in that particular case, I will have to take a lot of the credit for that.
Yeah.
They did thank me very much when we finished to say, Ghana, we had a problem with our business brand.
What did you pull out of what rabbit did you pull out of that hat?
I think I was just one of those that was prepared to take a risk and keep it running. Because a liquidator is personally responsible for any debt that is incurred from the date of liquidation. So what liquidators tend to be very careful about is not doing anything that might actually expose themselves personally, because we have to put security with the master on behalf of the creditors, so that if we don't do our job properly, or in fact we do it improperly where we do nefarious things, then there's a bond of security that can be used to try and
who puts that bond in place?
that is done by the master. When you go and get your... So first of all,
What
the judge
undergirds
makes
it?
the
What
decision.
is the actual security under that bond?
It's in the
Is there
form of
some
a
money?
bank guarantee,
Oh.
or it's, in my case, I normally put the deposit with the master's office.
So the money would have come from you
Yes,
or from
personally.
creditors?
No.
You
This
personally
is
have
personal.
Oh,
Yes,
that's under both the Insolvency Act and the Companies Act.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right.
I mean, there are in more developed markets
Mm.
like South Africa, there are specialist liquidator insurance bonds,
yeah.
because here we haven't quite got there. We will get there because the
And
masters will start
How do you
asking.
determine the amount?
Well, that's at the discretion of the master. So it
Oh.
will depend on what type of asset it is, what type of business it might be. So if it's a property company, it's very difficult to steal the property from the creditors because it's there.
It's physically
it's
there.
physically there.
Mm.
So your level of security doesn't need to be that high because
Yeah.
it's unlikely that you're going to be able to, as a
Yeah.
liquidator,
Mm.
steal the assets.
Yes.
But for companies that are more fluid, then, I mean, yeah, when I was the liquidator of BCL, I had to put a bond of 100 million bula down. Now, that doesn't mean to say that I have 100 million bula.
Yeah.
I went to the insurance market and I said, I need a bond, an insurance bond, for 100 million bula to satisfy the master's requirements. And the insurers do their risk assessment to say, can we trust this guy to not default?
Namely
And
the
so-
master or you?
The liquidator,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
the bond
yeah.
is on me.
Yes.
I have to go and say to the master that somebody believes that trusts me
Yeah.
to put up the security. Obviously, it's an expensive exercise.
Yeah.
That is a cost that is covered by the creditors, unfortunately. So although we have to put up the security or the bond or the guarantee, any costs associated with that are for the account of the creditors,
Yeah,
not for
yeah.
the liquidator.
I'm going to talk to you about BCL momentarily, but before I do, I want you to paint a picture about the insolvency or the status of liquidation in Botswana. Keeping
Yes.
in mind that in America, for instance, we have the Chapter 11
Yes.
protections and
Yes.
so on. Keeping that in mind and comparing with that situation, what is the infrastructure like?
I will be honest and say it's very poor. We have got outdated legislation for a start. We are actually ranking very badly now on, you remember the old world business, the doing business rankings?
Yes.
So they've reinvented those. I'm trying to remember what they call them, but in one particular area where we are actually now doing quite badly is how effective is our insolvency infrastructure. Because for investors, it's hugely important to know that if they go and invest in a country, that if things go wrong, that there is proper rule of law and that there is a proper framework in which creditors are treated fairly and equally according to their rankings and all of those good things. And although we do have the laws,
Our books.
we do have them in our books. They are fairly outdated. We don't have, for example, in South Africa, they have, in the US, you've got this Chapter 11.
Yes, I was going
In South Africa, there's a similar thing there. They call it business rescue. They've got business rescue legislation. We don't have that here. We have simply the Insolvency Act and the Companies Act, which provide for judicial management or liquidation. But the judicial
I want
management...
to interrupt there and ask you, the absence of these two,
Yes.
Chapter 11 and rescue, has it not to some extent stifled our entrepreneurial ecosystem as a country or affected the infrastructure significantly?
It may have. I think the reality is that in Botswana, very little formal insolvency actually happens. Because it's not regulated, because we are still not very good at holding directors accountable for a company when it goes wrong. So by the time a company is going into liquidation, it's normally too late. It's literally too late to save it. A lot
The
more
assets
work.
have gone.
The assets have gone, or the business
the
has
owners
even,
have jumped ship and so
yeah.
on.
So there is a lot of scope in Botswana for better awareness, better education, and in fact, colleagues of mine in the sector are busy establishing a proper insolvency practitioners association, so that we can actually start engaging with stakeholders.
Before we get into BCL in a moment, before we get there, what other work were you doing? And I'm asking this as an entrepreneur, as people who are talking to entrepreneurs. What other work were you doing at KPMG or elsewhere for investors, local and foreign?
Yeah. So I was part of the part of the business that I worked in KPMG was called the advisory, effectively the consultancy side. So we did a lot of consultancy projects. We would do quite a lot of work with government on public sector reform. We were, when I was at KPMG, we were involved in trying to establish, and I say trying to, working for government historically has always been a challenge because once you've finished the work you've done and you leave, quite often everything that's been done disappears. We were appointed to put in the eGov office 10 years ago for the OneGov stop for Botswana to be able to interact with government online.
The software, is it?
Not just, it was the whole program office because it required the whole of government to shift the way they do. They
were required as KPMG or as
Yeah. So we it was a tender. We bid for it. We had expertise in that area. We were there for 2 years. Unfortunately, after 2 years, it didn't achieve what we wanted to achieve, and after we were gone, because we are consultants, so you have to. At the end of the day, you only get paid if you finish your deliverables and they're signed off. And we completed the project. And unfortunately, we are no further ahead today than we were 10 years
back
ago,
then,
which is a real pity because Botswana has lost a few opportunities to maintain some of the advantages it had. And I'm hoping
and
that
it sort of
it
has
will
died. I don't want to say a natural death. It's just sort of, or what happened?
Well, I think even at the time we knew the risk because the time that we were doing it, I think was already the second or the third attempt. And the thing is, the public get tired of being promised that all of this change is coming and all of this improved service delivery is coming. And then we are still stuck being told that you must take your umang over there to that government department and get it certified before we will deal with you. And you're like, guys, please can you just be one government? Don't ask me to deal with 20 different governments as a citizen. So that is frustrating. So it was actually quite frustrating doing public sector consulting. I preferred the private sector consulting.
So in the end, it fizzled out.
Yes. Yeah.
So what happened to the tender?
No, we completed it. We delivered. But like a lot of consultancy projects, it's the transition to ownership and accountability by your client.
Implementation.
And we just need to get better at that here. But no, otherwise my main area when I wasn't busy on consulting projects or insolvency is tax.
Okay.
Everybody hates tax. For me, it is the lifeblood of a country. So it should be managed properly. People should pay what is due to be paid. People shouldn't pay what is not due to be paid because it's a funny system. You go to the shop, you choose what you want to buy, you pay for it. Tax, you don't have a choice.
Did you undergo special training there?
Not specifically. Accountants generally come trained in certain aspects of tax. And then once you decide to take it on, then of course you do your own development. And so, I mean, I've been on a number of international tax training courses and things like that. It's more about... if it's an area of passion, you will naturally spend time reading up about it.
It is a mysterious area, isn't it?
It is.
I'll tell you why I'm saying that, because I've seen generally, generally, another man's tax avoidance is another's tax evasion.
Yes.
So sometimes the grey area is so grey that even the experts don't seem to agree.
Yes.
I know that one is illegal, one is not illegal.
Yes.
But don't you find that it's just so... confusing.
It is. It is, which is why it is important to make tax as simple as possible. There is too much of this business. If you look at the US and South Africa as well, we not saying that we're better, because we don't actually have a lot of tax precedents, cases, things like that here to draw on.
We seem to rely on South African
We do
cases.
rely heavily on South Africa and Commonwealth countries or the UK. But, if you look at an American system, it's a very rules-driven system where over time, all of these little things come up and they make a rule, they make a rule, they make a rule. So now to understand your tax affairs in the US, you have no choice but to appoint a tax consultant.
Yeah, just to
That
tell
is not where we should go here. Botswana should understand clearly, simply, what taxes am I required to pay?
So what do
when
you do for companies at the moment?
Services
on tax, what can you do?
So we help, obviously there's what we call general compliance. So every company has to comply with a number of things. It must do annual returns, it must do monthly returns, VAT, PAYE, withholding tax, income tax. So there's that compliance function that we manage, help companies manage, to make sure that they don't expose themselves unnecessarily to penalties and interest and things like that. And then the other side of our business is solving tax problems, where it could be that a client will come to us and say, I'm planning to do this project. Please tell me how it's going to work from a tax point of view so that I can build it in and expect to know how it's going to work. Or they come to us after the tax problem has arrived. Maybe BERS has come to do an audit, and BERS has said, we think that there are some extra taxes you should be paying.
Sometimes they go back 7 years.
Sometimes BERS want to go back 20 years. And so we a lot of our time is actually spent
what actually is the
helping
limit
clients with those.
to the furthest they can go?
So very generally, BERS is only really allowed to go back up to 4 years from the date you've submitted, or the tax year concerned. They can go back another 4 years if they say they decide to review the last 2 or 3 years that you've submitted, because they don't review them when you submit them necessarily. They'll pick up your file and say, let me look at the last 3 years. They go through. If they find errors that seem to have been in play even before that 4-year period, then they can extend it to 8 years. They can only go beyond 8 years if there's what we call fraud or willful intention to evade tax. So, and a lot of the work that we do is, we call it disputes, because BERS has one position and the client or the company will have another position.
Who makes a ruling as to whether it's willful or not, it's fraud or not? They decide,
That will be
or does it
BERS.
go to an independent court?
No, so what BERS will do, they've got a lot of power. So BERS will go and investigate your books of account, your records.
They've got draconian power.
And to be honest, rightly so, as long as it's not abused. Because the taxman does need to have certain powers, because it's, they're not to be treated the same as any other normal supplier. Because at the end of the day, that's where the money comes from to run infrastructure, government. So for BERS, they will do, however, generally, whatever they find, they will just continue looking. And if they find older and older stuff, and then they decide, we think this is fraud, so we're going to go back even further. By that stage, the company, the taxpayer, will be aware there's a problem, and they will probably call somebody like us to say, I think I need a bit of help. It's a little bit like reaching out to a lawyer. When you have a legal problem, when you have a tax problem, you phone your tax consultant to say...
Speaking of a legal problem, an entrepreneur colleague of mine showed me a letter last week, as a matter of fact, from BERS. And BERS had said, we want you to bring audited books, audited statements of account or for the last 6-7 years, I think. 6 or 7 years. When they do that, what would be the problem? And they want them audited.
Yes.
And how should one respond?
So, there is actually no law currently in our tax legislation that forces you to have audited accounts. The only law that applies there is the Companies Act. So the tax man actually doesn't really have his own legal right to ask for audited accounts.
He doesn't.
Technically not.
Yeah.
But most taxpayers are companies.
Yeah.
So, of course, if you don't want to produce audited accounts, BERS just contacts SEPA to say, these guys are refusing to do audited accounts. Can you please take some actions? The reason, of course, they want audited accounts is because by an auditor signing on those accounts, they are saying that these accounts are accurate, they're true and fair, and they fairly represent the business and the status of the client. And normally they will do that, especially if BERS say specifically we want audited accounts. It means that either you've given them some information previously which they have found not to be correct. And then they say, you know what, we can't rely on what you give us. We want somebody independent to sign off to say what you're giving us is correct.
You've positioned yourself in the market. Obviously, the tech side I wasn't aware of. But for the longest time, you pick a newspaper, the last couple of decades.
Yes.
Dixon-Warren, the Liquidator.
Yeah.
Dixon-Warren, the Liquidator. How did you, what is your secret sauce, as it were? How did you get yourself to be recognized by the public as such an expert?
No, nobody knew me as a liquidator until I became the liquidator of BCL. I've done about 25 other liquidations. Do you think?
You've done quite a few before that.
But I don't know if anybody knew.
I knew.
Oh, well, okay,
I
yes.
definitely knew because I'm a member of the public.
No, fair enough. Look, I think the...
How did you position yourself?
No, it wasn't even on purpose. Insolvency work, it presents itself because there's no plan for insolvency. You know, a company gets into trouble and tries to avoid the issues, then eventually the creditors say, you know what, we want our money, we're going to court. Then all of a sudden you get a phone call to say, are you available? Are you conflicted? Do you have any reason why you cannot be the liquidator of this company? Because if you were the auditor, or if you're the director, or if you're an employee, or you've been providing services, you have to be careful about taking on the appointment as a liquidator in case there's a conflict. So you're first asked, are you available? And then you say yes, and then they say thank you. The creditors will be recommending to the court to please appoint you as a provisional. Because remember, the court can only appoint somebody in a provisional capacity. The decision to appoint a liquidator is always with the creditors, because they are the people or companies that have the most to lose.
But you positioned yourself, I suspect, in the eyes of the creditors as someone who does this job. Is it because you're one of the very few that were available in Botswana, or? So
I think there are a number of professional, particularly accountants. Liquidations and insolvencies are normally done either by lawyers or accountants. You do get other experts as well. I think for me, it may have just been a timing thing, where when government decided that BCL needed to go into formal liquidation, they must have assessed from the market of practitioners who might be able to deal with this size and complexity of liquidation. Unfortunately, liquidations are not a talent contest. In most countries, nobody knows about liquidators. It's a very non-high profile profession. I think in Botswana, maybe because it's not so regular, it's quite rare, that it provides... my experience has been is that as soon as the newspapers get interested, then you know you're in trouble. Because a liquidator doesn't really want to be in the media. Very few people understand the job. It's very different to being a director or an entrepreneur from that perspective, because you're coming in at the end. Or what could be the end. So I don't know if I played any particular, apart from... Look, I've always been quite vocal. When I've been part of Business Botswana for many years, I was part of the Institute for many years. I was very involved in the doing business consultations and committees. And maybe through that process, maybe that elevated my profile per se. gape ga go thuse gore ga o bua Setswana o le motho o tshwana le nna ga ke itse. That also, of course, one cannot deny that
ebile ha o se buela o batla o ira gore ke go botse gore o se ithutetse kae le gore o goletse kae ha se ga borone hela
nya o itse gore keng every holiday ha go tswetse dikolo I used to be sent by my mother with our house helper Gloria Lesego. I grew up with her son. So we used to go to Serowe every holiday for a week or two. So that's where ke be ke simula ke bua ka Sengwato. Ke leba ntsa is ntja. So I learned
Metswana sa go se gaisa sa mongwe o kileng a nna moetele dipelo a lehatshe
nya nte ke sa bui ka dinya
ke ra re Setswana sa
ntse mo mathateng ya
okay so you get a phone call BCL is in trouble, we want you. Paint the picture. What happened?
So the first thing that happens is normally the potential liquidator gets the call when the decision has been made to make an application to court. And in that application, the creditor wants to be able to put forward a person that they believe can take on the job as a provisional liquidator. So I think I was informed on a Friday. I was actually away in Cape Town that I got a phone call to say, are you available to take this on? And I went, yes, but I'm away in South Africa at the moment. I'm due back next week. And they said, you will need to come back soon because we are taking this to court today on Friday. And I believe they managed to get the judge to sit on...
Are you required to sign something to confirm your availability?
Yes.
Is it an affidavit?
It's simply a willingness to act, to say, I am available subject to the court. Yes, it must be in writing, yes. So we did that remotely and sent it through. So by the Monday, the liquidation order had been given.
This is 2016?
2016, yes. And I was driving back from Cape Town to Gaborone as quickly as I could to take up the position. And it started from there. I had to go with, I think at the time it was Vice President Masisi.
Was this a political decision or a financial decision?
I was not party to the decision. This is always the problem for a liquidator.
I'm sure you looked at it,
do I think the liquidation was the right move? Yes. Could it have done with a lot more planning? Yes. I understand that the decision to liquidate followed quite a detailed assessment by government through their the Minerals Development Company of Botswana, MDCB, which was set up to look after the government mining interests. They had done a detailed assessment of BCL and they had concluded that BCL could no longer continue to...
But am I right in saying 5 years or less earlier, we're told that Mr. Mpati or somebody like that is running it very well and profitably?
Yes.
How could there have been a quick change like that?
Unfortunately, BCL, like any what I call base metal operation, particularly over the last 20, 30 years, has been very cyclical. So you would have the copper nickel prices were elevated to world record levels in 2008, for example.
Yeah.
A lot of investments going into mining. By 2009, those prices had dropped by 60, 70, 80%.
Who sets those prices?
It's the world market.
Is it just a victim of the meltdown?
It's literally global prices.
Remember the meltdown took place.
Correct.
Was it a victim?
That was part of it. Then so it suffered through that phase. Then the markets picked back up.
Yeah.
When Rembati was there, I think around I can't remember when he left. It was around 2013, 2014. But that period, 2012, 2011, the prices went up sky high again.
Yeah.
So everybody that was in the business of mining copper nickel was making money because the prices were so good. Then the prices crashed again. And they went down for a very long time.
Is it not possible, like we do with diamonds, to stockpile when the prices go down?
I don't know if it's so easy in the base
Is it
metal
not
industry.
feasible?
You know, the
Because we stockpile a
infrastructure.
lot. I think maybe Botswana has more control
Yeah.
over the market
Yeah,
for diamonds.
I think a
than-
very, very different market. You know, when you're mining copper nickel, I mean, we are a very, very small pinprick in the global supply chain. The global supply chain requires continuous running. You've got to keep smelters running. You've got to keep refineries running. So you can't just say, oh, I'm not getting a good price at the moment.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop and stockpile. Because, for example, the BCL smelter, you couldn't switch that off. If you switch the BCL smelter off, it would take 3 months to get back up and running with a lot of cost.
Yeah.
So,
So
look-
once you are appointed, did you take any steps to stabilize the situation?
yes.
And
My-
was that with a view to maybe initially wanting to save the mine? Was
Yes.
that thought
Yes,
ever
of
in
course.
your mind?
Yes, absolutely. The very, very first thing I did, I was asked by government, what will be your plan? And I said, well, I'm very new to this, so I need to go and do a very quick assessment. But in any mining entity, you want to understand, is there opportunity? What are the risks that face those opportunities? And then take it from there. So very quickly, what we realized was that because the nature of the way the operations had stopped were not a proper shutdown process. Literally, I believe the instruction went out from government to say the company is going to liquidation, and I think management interpreted that as, well, we better switch everything off and go home. And you can't really do that in a mining and processing environment. So a lot of our initial few months was spent actually cleaning out and rehabilitating all of that
Short term.
short term. We also had to put the mines into care and maintenance very, very quickly, because without BCL, as you are aware, has got very deep underground mining
Because the mine
areas.
is how old?
It started in the late 1950s, early 1960s.
Okay, so
yeah.
it's decades, eh? So we kept going deeper.
We were at one point we were mining 4 kilometers away from the opening at the top.
Are you meaning vertically down?
Down and then sorry, I
Yeah.
mustn't you wave my arms too much.
Yeah.
So they had the shaft, but because they had a lack of money for capital development, as we call it, the mining underground would then start following the resource.
Yeah.
So they would literally, it would go meander, if I can call it that.
Yes.
And the deepest mine and the furthest mine was about 4 kilometers
Yeah.
from the surface eventually. That meant that, and when we did our assessment, it became very quick that in a market where production has to be very strictly cost controlled, because your prices are always very tight, there was no ways BCL could make money out of that process.
So if it wasn't for the tanking of the prices,
Yes.
the mine still had a lifespan left.
No, not
Oh.
technically. The mine had stopped doing what's called mining development quite a few years before, because they'd run out of money. So they only had enough money to keep the recurrent operation. It's a bit like government's budget. We've got our capital expenditure, or our
Yeah.
development expenditure, and our recurrent expenditure.
Yes.
And because we were only earning enough to cover our recurrent expenditure, and even then we were still having to borrow money, get money from government, we had no money for development.
That means you're on a treadmill, one place, you're not moving.
And
You
in
just pay-
fact,
yeah.
what BCL were unfortunately doing at the end was, it was in the industry, it's called mining blind, where you are mining thinking and hoping that the resource you are mining is going to have something in it. And you literally do all hard work.
So is it your view, Mr. Liquidator, that regardless whether there had been an economic meltdown or whether there had not been one, at some point by today we would have had to close anyway?
BCL was probably beyond the date in which such action was necessary. It could have been done differently had there been earlier decisions taken around restructuring it
Yeah.
and putting together a proper operating model maybe there could have still been something there.
No, but I mean, what do you mean something when the resource has been depleted itself?
No, the resources still. Remember, when I say they were mining blind, it was because they didn't have scientifically proven geological studies.
Yes.
They had enough information to tell us, them, Botswana, there are resources. But remember, resources are only viable if they're economically, commercially viable.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there are stages of certainty.
Yeah.
And BCL's resource statement, as it's called,
Yeah.
was very weak. It says, we think there's a lot, but we haven't done enough geological assessments to know exactly how viable this is.
Yeah.
We also know that over the years, mining technologies change. They've changed massively over the last 50 years. We also know that prices go up or down. So our advice at the time to government was, let us get this mine into a efficient care and maintenance operation. It happens all over the world, where you mothball a mining complex.
And that would have taken how long?
No, we did it. We had it down into what I called a sustainable care and maintenance within about 12 months.
Yeah.
And it took that long. There was a lot of things that needed to be fixed. I said to government, you can just keep it there. And until we find somebody who wants to come and open it again and the prices are well up, etc. But the pressure was starting too early. It was, no, we need to sell it now. We need to sell it now. And I said, you're not going to find a buyer because there's no information.
Yeah.
The important information is not there. That needs to be developed. That takes 3 to 5 years.
Were you involved or in any way part of those politically explosive evictions that dominated the headlines?
So this is a challenging question for a liquidator because in our laws, and as I say, they're outdated, they only allow you to look at the interests of the creditors. In other countries with more developed insolvency systems, they also require you to look at the public interest. Here, there's no such space for public interest. So I made it, government actually asked me that question. They said, what are we going to do about all the employees? And I said, well, as a liquidator, there's no money. I therefore have to, unfortunately, terminate all employees unless you're going to give me some money, government, to put this into care and maintenance, and then I will retain enough people for care and maintenance.
Because government normally would have some money for emergencies like that.
Sure. So that the decision to keep employees was simply based on the circumstances that I faced, which was under the mining laws, I was required to put that mine into care and maintenance. Otherwise, I would be personally liable, even though I didn't cause it. But if I then contribute,
because you're not following the law.
If I don't then follow the law from when I become responsible, then I'm personally responsible.
So why did people have to be evicted from their houses?
So look, the reality was that all of that housing in Piqui had been allocated to staff members, and a lot of them were living there. A lot of them were no longer living there and had actually started renting them out to other people. There were instances of that. Our job, we understood that there was a public interest element, but it was beyond the scope of the liquidator. So what we convinced government to do was to say, look, as a liquidator, I have all of these houses. I need to make sure that they're safe and they're maintained as well as we can if people are going to live in them.
Yeah.
So if people are going to live in them, government, they're all ex-employees of BCL, or should be ex-employees of BCL. I can't let them live in an asset of the company without some rent being paid. So government agreed, and they said, no, we'll pay you some rent so that you don't evict those
for a limited
employees.
Period of time?
For a limited period of time. No, well, it was on a rolling basis.
Yes.
So up until I left, that was actually the way it was happening.
Yeah.
We were supposed to be trying to retain.
So they were not actually evicted for some time.
Not while I was there. Obviously, my unfortunate job was that I had to retrench or terminate 4,500 jobs. Was the first job that I had to do. That was the most difficult one.
Was this one of the most challenging engagements you ever had?
Yes.
By
By far. And funny enough, the most enjoyable. Sounds
Isn't
odd.
that- Isn't that a
Professionally.
paradox?
Professionally,
How can
it
you
was-
enjoy something that is odd? So it was challenging
yes,
in the sense that you had to use all your creative juices,
yes,
and you enjoyed
Yes.
that process.
yes.
Is that right?
From a professional point of view, it was a highly satisfactory job.
Okay.
From a personal point of view,
Mm.
it was a highly unsatisfactory job,
Yeah.
if I can put it that way.
Because
there
the
were lots of-
politicians were on your head.
There were lots of people upset.
Mm.
It's that's the reality of being a
Yeah.
liquidator.
So let me ask you something before I forget. If the mine was reaching its end,
Yes.
how come Russians from Canada were interested in the mine so publicly?
So there wasn't a lot of interest in the mine for a long time. Where the Russians had interests was that the Norilsk is the company from
Yes,
Russia
yeah.
that actually owned Tati Nickel Mining Company in Francistown, near Francistown,
Yes.
which needed BCL to smelt its output.
Mm-hmm.
So they were so Norilsk were very, very keen on making sure that BCL continued to operate because it was a key
Was the
part of
smelter
their...
inside the mine or outside the mine?
The smelter was in the BCL mining area.
Couldn't the two be separated? The smelter aspect be separated from the mine?
Well, they were. It's just
Okay.
on the same land area. They needed to be
And
close
owned
by
by the
for
same
logistics.
company
Yes,
as well.
well, they don't have to be owned by the same company, but BCL built that smelter back in 1968, and it was the biggest smelter in the southern hemisphere.
It was
It was
running
huge.
beautifully.
And the technology was great, and it ran until they started running out of money to keep it run properly.
So when they were liquidated, or when the political decision was made, was the smelter also closed at the same
Yes.
time?
Yes.
So what happened to the work from Tati Nickel that needed to be smelted?
Tati Nickel by that stage had, I think, stopped operating.
No, I mean this Russian element. Where they
So
want-
Norilsk managed to dispose, as part of the deal to try to sell, I don't know if you were aware, but BCL had a strategy around 2014, 13, 14, 15. They called it Polaris 2. And that strategy was to actually diversify and get involved in much broader mining opportunities. And as part of that strategy, they actually bought Tati Nickel Mining from Norilsk so that it could form part of BCL's supply feed. And then they also agreed that they would buy the Nkomati mine in
Yes.
South Africa. That, by the time the company went into liquidation, the Nkomati mine deal hadn't concluded, but the Tati one had. So Tati was part of the BCL group by the time it went
Yeah.
into liquidation, but it hadn't been operating for some time because it also needed some extra resource and capital and things
Yeah.
like that.
I still want to revisit the issue of you saying the job was very satisfying for you. Explain that in simple terms.
I think I was working for about 3 years. I think I worked 7 days a week, with occasionally taking a day off when I could. But it was a
Meetings.
no,
doing
not just
what?
meeting,
Paperwork?
doing work. Because what ended up happening is that I was required to go to so many meetings that the only time I could do my work was at nights and at weekends. So from that point of view, that's why I say personally it was quite stressful. It was hard on the family. But from a professional point of view, everybody asked me, why did you take it on? I said, when you are phoned up to say, as a professional,
Your country needs
this is the one big liquidation that is just going to be so complicated, so it'll just have everything that goes with anything you ever wanted to be experienced in. So I took it on that basis, was that I saw it as a big challenge. I knew it was going to take a long time because that is the nature of the beast. And I gained, until the end, when things became difficult with government, when the communication channels broke down, when misunderstandings arose, then it became unpleasant. And
Yeah.
that's eventually when I said to them, if you don't think I'm the right person for the job, then let me go
Yeah.
and find somebody who's prepared to do it.
So you're not fired, you quit.
I formally quit.
Yeah.
But I was put in a position where I was told that if you
Yeah.
don't
If you
go
don't,
of your own volition,
Yeah.
then
if
we'll
you don't
have to
jump, we'll
arrange.
push you. Yeah. Huh? Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yes,
If you
yes.
don't jump, we'll
Yeah,
push you.
yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
the total length of time you were there,
I was there for just under 3 years.
and what would you say was the lowest moment apart from leaving?
But the last 6 months
Hmm.
was very, very difficult. Very
Because
difficult.
is it because you were in an environment in which you are unaccustomed with, it just now politics? Because that's
I
a
think
very
I was a poor politician.
yeah. That's
Yes.
what I'm saying. You're in a different terrain.
Yes, I'm a
'Cause
very poor
yeah.
politician
Yeah.
because I don't understand politics.
Mm.
For me, it was very simple.
Mm.
Government, this is your asset ultimately, and therefore it is your responsibility to make sure that it has sufficient funding. Yes, we understand that you can't fund it as an operating entity and finance all of those costs, but certainly the care and maintenance to make the assets saleable.
Yeah.
There was only one person that had the money for that, and which was government. And as I say, it became very challenging as it became much more unclear as to whether there was any certainty as to whether funding would continue to be made available.
Yeah.
And when there's, I had 500 people working there. I was actually running a team of 500
Towards the
people.
end.
All the way through. Mm-hmm. The care and maintenance operation was a significant
huge.
operation. Yeah.
Because it
Yeah.
seems there was a view that something could be salvaged.
Yes.
What could have been salvaged?
Well, as I say, I think there are opportunities. For example, we've got one of the biggest. So there were a number of issues. You've got the mine dump. It's called the dam, which is where all the tailings went. These are the end of the process of the smelting process or the processing process.
Yeah.
And it goes and gets. Those dams these days are exploited themselves because they've got sufficient mineral resources to warrant reprocessing them again. So there's opportunities there. And especially because neither of their dumps were, because they were built so long ago, they weren't under current environmental regulations. They had no sealing
Okay.
between the dump and the underground systems. So those today, the one dump is leaching into the water system. It's a problem. It needs to be sorted out. There were various ways and means that smaller projects could have been started up, still can be started up, because it's not going anywhere. The problem
Yeah.
is not going anywhere. So there are still opportunities
So
to...
I know you're not a politician, but why did it become a political hot potato at the end? Or do you think personalities became too?
I would be speculating.
Yeah,
But, I think honestly, when the decision was taken in 2016, one must assume that there was a lot of political thought that went into that.
Yeah.
The timing, it was 3 years before the next election.
Yeah.
So perhaps the thought was that by the time the election comes, this problem should really have gone away.
Yeah.
It hadn't. Not because of my doing. Maybe they thought it was because of my doing. The problem was never going to go
Yeah.
away. It is still there today. We're now coming 9 years
Speaking
after.
of the problem being there, I have it on good authority that HE is appointing a commission of inquiry into this.
Yes, I understand so.
Do you believe that your role is going to be subjected to scrutiny? And how are you going to position yourself to deal with that?
So, I've seen the release from the I think it's the Office of the President that there's going to be a commission of inquiry. This is actually something that I asked for in 2017 in the public meeting of creditors.
Yeah.
It was my recommendation 7 years ago that the BCL matter should be a commission of inquiry. It was so significant to our economy that I thought it was important. So I'm very pleased that there is going to be one.
You believe then that there was wrongdoing and malfeasance that needed to be investigated?
It was looking that way. It was looking that way.
Still is?
I haven't been there now since 2019,
Yeah.
which is when I left, middle of 2019. So I don't really know what's happened in the last
So
5
what's
years.
likely to come out of the Commission of Inquiry? I mean, what's likely to be salvaged? Or is it the attitude that heads must roll?
Do you know, I think the most important thing about commissions of inquiry is the learnings of what to do, how not to do things after that. So,
Isn't that academic?
look, it could certainly lead to some sort of potential recoveries, if I can
Yes.
call it that. But I think the
From
real...
certain people.
Yes. Yeah.
So heads might roll. It's possible.
Possibly.
Yeah,
Possibly.
yeah.
You know, it's...
But obviously you have to be careful.
Yeah, I mean,
how
I
you-
will obviously, a commission of inquiry is as such as that you can just be told you're coming to testify, or please will you come and testify. I was involved in BCL. I was its liquidator for 3 years, so I have no, I cannot expect not to be called
Yeah.
if they want to talk about it. I don't know what the scope of the commission of inquiry is.
Yeah.
Whether it's
You
looking
mean the
at
terms of reference?
pre-liquidation, whether it's looking at post-liquidation, whether it's looking at the whole thing, I don't know. So I will just be, I'm interested.
Since you left, you've been in the dark. Have you been kept in the dark, or there was enough information trickling down to you?
I've only seen what's been in the newspapers publicly, and
Yeah.
I knew when I was liquidator, don't always believe what is in the newspapers.
Yeah.
So difficult to know. I'm aware of,
Yeah.
of certain things that have gone through the public domain, like the Competition Authority and things like
Yeah.
that. I have kept up to
Okay.
date roughly on what's been happening, but not in any detail.
Yeah. I want to just go back to the tax issue.
Yes.
One of the things when we were prepping we touched on is the 30% rule and its exceptions. I forgot to ask
this
you
is from
about
a
that.
property developer point of view.
Yes, yes.
So this is the famous 30% restriction on interest. So as you can imagine, as you well know, as a property developer, you often have to go and get quite hefty bank financing or loans to be able to do your property development, and those come with a heavy interest cost.
Obviously.
So what our tax policymakers decided a number of years ago, and it is a common thing around the world,
2019, I
Yeah.
believe.
was that, look, we don't want to encourage reckless borrowing. And one way to do that is to not give property owners an unlimited amount of interest that they can deduct from their taxable income.
Which used to be the case for the longest. When I started
Correct.
my
Yes.
investing career,
Yes.
that
Yes.
was the
Yes.
that was
Yeah.
a beauty.
Yes,
And,
absolutely. Absolutely.
I remember when the rule was first introduced, there was an uproar from even publicly listed companies and the likes
So
of us.
yes,
that-
sometimes these policy changes are made without necessarily checking to see what the impact might be.
Yeah.
So very immediately there were a number of problems. The banks immediately said, "But hold on, our business is to generate interest and to charge interest. So we must be exempt from that." Yes, of course you must be exempt. Then the property funds, who are VRLS, variable rate loan stock companies, a bit of a complicated system, but that fundamentally is giving interest to your shareholders.
Yes.
And as soon as it became apparent that they were going to be affected, of course, that's then... So a number of changes were made. And now they've pretty much exempted the financial services sector, the property fund sector, but not necessarily
Not the investors.
the individual investor who
Maybe
goes...
because we didn't lobby hard enough.
Possibly.
Maybe we can
Possibly.
still lobby.
Maybe you can.
Yeah.
It was very difficult to enforce because nobody really understood the formula in the current Tax Act. They have rewritten it in the new Tax Act, so they are keeping it, but it is easier
Have
to
they
follow.
found a way of enforcing it now?
Well, the enforcement side is still a
It's still
bird's
lacking.
requirement.
Yeah.
They if a taxpayer decides to ignore the law, because we are moving more and more, and we will with our new legislation, be moving on to what's called self-assessment completely.
Yeah.
Where you as a taxpayer are expected to self-assess
Yeah.
what you should pay, and you will be held responsible if you do it wrong. It's not up to BERS to check and say to you, that's correct, it's okay. BERS doesn't have to do that.
You.
The onus is on you to make sure it's correct.
So, is it your view that it was a mistake to do this? Has it affected investment in the property sector? And am I right to be aggrieved by the situation?
That is a more policy type discussion. And policy levers, you can agree with them, you can disagree with them, but at the end of the day, its intention I can understand, which is to have better capitalized businesses. Because at the end of the day, what they're trying to do is to say to you, instead of just opening your company with 100 pula and then going and borrowing 1 million to do your business, put in 300,000 and borrow 700,000, because then you've got more skin in the game. You're more likely to try and make it work.
That's the
Whereas
purpose.
if you're using other people's money, maybe it's not. So it's almost an economic policy that's using the tax system to drive economic policy. And I'm not an economist.
Yeah.
So I look at it from a tax perspective and I think, that's unfair. If a taxpayer is incurring a real cost, then it's unfair to restrict it.
Okay.
But from an economic policy point of view, maybe you can understand it.
It's a very politically correct response.
Thank you.
What did you say are the secrets of success? What are your secrets of long-term success? Because I look at you, I see a successful accountant, I see a successful liquidator, I see a successful businessman. What did you say are the essential ingredients?
Belief in yourself, belief in your abilities. Make sure that you understand your areas of passion. So first of all, be passionate about what you do. There's no point in I know there's a lot of angry accountants in Botswana. I don't know about angry lawyers, but I call them angry accountants. You know, Botswana's policy from independence up until not so long ago was very focused on developing the engineering disciplines, the
lawyers and so on.
Lawyers kind of they rule the world, so that's natural. But it was all the other disciplines, because of the importance of our mining sector and all of that. I think the top graded students were pushed to the engineering fields or to the legal fields, and those that were more interested in business, entrepreneurship, maybe finance, were maybe their grades weren't as high as the guys that became lawyers or as the guys that became the doctors or the engineers. So you can go and do a BCom or a BAc. And then the system forces you to become an accountant. Because where do you go once you've got your BCom accounting? Well, then I better qualify as an accountant. And I gave a lecture at a conference many years ago when I said, actually in Botswana what we've got is a bunch of angry accountants. People that never actually wanted to be accountants. But because of circumstances, they find themselves here. Now, that for me is a problem. If you don't want to be an accountant, don't be an accountant. Because if you don't want to be a lawyer, don't be a lawyer.
Yeah.
You must want to be it. You must be passionate about it. Because that is the only way that you are going to become recognized as somebody who knows what they're talking about in those areas.
You're going to become an authority.
You've got to become an authority. That's all changing with AI. Now, a student can go and give something that looks of authority as good as mine.
Yeah, but you ask him a couple of questions, he falls apart.
Of course, of course. So one has to avoid that side. So for me, look, there's nothing like hard work. You will know. Anybody who's, particularly if you take risk, it doesn't come without hard work. There's no easy road to being successful. I will say that, of course, having a good education always helps. Even if one messes it up, you still have that broad...
Would you say for you that was a game changer?
I think it gave me an unfair advantage. I spent a lot of time when I was at KPMG. We obviously, part of our structure is to develop young trainees coming through, and by the time it was 20 years ago, all of our intake was coming from UB or from the BAC, and we were dealing with people that didn't have the opportunities that I had. My replacement senior partner came through the very same government school system in the village, managed to, on her own, made it through university, and
Pulled
is now
herself by the bootstraps.
pulled herself by the bootstraps, and it can be done. It's tough. We, and I say we, those of us that had access to good quality
Yeah.
education, were obviously at an advantage.
Yeah.
And we should recognize that.
And what about the country? Was it an advantage to have been born here, to have developed your career here? Looking back,
Yes.
are you sometimes feel like a diamond baby? Like sometimes I do.
I have to be honest, yes. I came back to Botswana. I went and lived in the UK for 5 years. That's where I qualified. I worked. I competed. And after 5 years, it never once occurred to me that I would live in the UK. It was always focused on coming back to Botswana. Why? It's where I grew up. It's where my family was. But more importantly, I felt I could make a difference. Whereas
It's
I felt,
patriotism.
when I say make a difference, I recognized with my time in the UK that many things have already been invented there, and you can't do things differently to the way they've been done. In Botswana, it's very different, and it still is very different.
Yeah.
It's actually
So
a
there's greater room
wealth
for
of opportunity,
innovation.
innovation. So that's really what drew me back here. And I will be very honest with you. If you are born this color
Yeah.
in those days,
As opposed to this one.
yeah, one can't avoid it.
Yes.
One must accept
Yes.
that one was treated differently.
Yeah.
And as long as you recognize that and
And you accept the
you
reality.
be humble
Yeah.
and not take advantage of things like that.
Needless.
My mother was very clear. There was an opportunity for me to just leave school, go and work, and I would get a job as a white Motswana. Hagona bothata, you would get a job. And when I got my first job offer, when I was still at school, as typically, I played rugby with all the guys at the rugby club. The first thing they said is, come and work for us, we'll give you a job. Simply on the basis of the color of my skin and the
I'm
fact
sure
that I
there
could
was-
speak Setswana.
I'm sure there was ability
They
as well.
didn't know anything about my ability. And I went home and I
Yeah,
said to
I
my
hear
mum,
you, I
Mum,
hear you."
I'm being offered a job with a company car and I'm only 18. And she said, my son, no, you are not going to do anything like that. You're going to go away. You're going to get a proper qualification. If you want to come and live here and work, you will do it not because you are privileged or not
But
because
on
you're
merit.
entitled, but because you've actually achieved something. And that I took
Sad
to heart.
but true.
Yeah.
Sad but
Yeah.
true.
And that's very important.
And that was the right thing to have
Yeah.
done. Now, let me ask you about the forecast. Looking into the future, what's your long-term success? Success plans? No, let me rephrase that. What does the crystal ball tell you when you look 10, 20 years down the line?
For Botswana or generally?
For yourself and for
For
your
me?
brand, yeah.
You know what? The pace of change that's coming is unbelievable. I'm a futurist. I'm a capitalist. I see what's going on in technology, AI, robotics. We will not be talking about not having enough skills in 10 years' time because it's all manufactured. So the reality is that the opportunity for us now is to try and keep pace, understand what's happening, and evolve your business. And one of the reasons I've opened my own practice is because I feel that I can be much more innovative.
You left the big firm.
I've left the big firms. I have a big network of people that I know what work they can do, how skilled they are, and I've decided that it's time to set up something that isn't necessarily aligned internationally,
Yeah.
but as a good, the lawyers have been doing it all the time. The accounting firms, for some reason, have focused a lot more on the international networks,
Yes.
which you can understand because the nature of the work requires that you have consistency, etc. But there is certainly space in our market
Yeah.
for a solid firm of professional advisors.
So the plan is to have a firm with how many professionals and how many accountants?
I will see
I'm
where
talking
it
5,
takes
10
me.
years.
I'll see where it takes me, but I have no doubt that I will be classified as one of the larger diversified professional
Yeah.
services firms, or
Yeah.
we
Yes.
by the time I get to bring in my
Sounds
my
exciting.
equity
Sounds
partners.
exciting.
Yeah.
This is a part of the show where you get to ask me a question.
Okay. I was in the profession for a very long time. And when you're in the profession,
3 or 4 decades.
yeah, you're not quite entrepreneurial. You are part of a structure. It is private sector, so it
Yes.
has elements of entrepreneurial thing. But now I'm a real entrepreneur. And I even look at all of the work that I do as part of my... So I was always interested to understand, you are an attorney, you started out as an attorney, and yet I don't know you as an attorney. That is not my experience of you.
Yes.
My experience of you is property, is the podcast, is other things that are not really associated with the
Yeah,
law. So
yeah.
I guess my question to you is, what's the single biggest block to moving from somebody like us who's been academically trained, professionally qualified, not really designed to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, yeah,
How have you made that leap? Because I'm still doing it and I'm still figuring it out.
yeah.
So please tell me how you move from a mindset point of view.
Yeah. No, you have to undergo a brain transplant, but in the sense of you being conscious about it, because we've been wired in a certain way. There's a certain level of professional arrogance
Yes.
that goes with our professions.
Yes.
To the point where we're now so insular. I mean, you go to a party, if you want to see this, you go to a party with lawyers, you'll see them just taking themselves out into a corner there.
Yeah,
They're just
yeah.
discussing legal stuff, the latest cases, what the
Yes,
judge said.
Yes, yes.
And they're very, very insular in that sense.
Yes.
And they look, I don't know whether to call it navel gazing, when you look into yourself too much as a profession. So that's once I discovered that I had that problem, in addition to the other things that pushed me, that you read about in my book, I then decided, look, I have to be conscious about it. So it was avid readership, personal development,
Yep.
attending conferences, and consciously going outside my profession. It took years.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
took years.
It wasn't natural. was
And
it?
it wasn't natural. I mean, there was a point when I even wanted to close the law firm altogether to be able to wean myself out. Of course, I ended up deciding to keep it going because it was complementary to the property side in terms of transfers,
Yes.
debt
yes,
collection,
yeah,
and so on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm actually now reviving it. I've
Okay.
got a new set of partners. I'm doing what you are doing.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll take you to the law firm after this conversation. So that's how it has to be, a conscious, deliberate effort. Because if you don't do it, I won't mention anyone by name. You just need to look at a super successful old guy in
Yes.
your profession,
Yes.
and that will incentivize you like no other business to go and study, to go and develop yourself outside your field.
Yeah.
Because if you see that old guy turning out the way that I don't want to end up like this, maybe that guy only has one house
Sure.
and
sure.
has not grown, and
Yeah. yeah.
you say to yourself, I don't want to be like him. So the only way is to be conscious and aggressive about it.
Yeah.
But let me not spoil it any further
No,
because
thank
it's
you.
all in the book.
Excellent. I look forward to reading it. Thank
I've
you.
opened up on it because I think it's
Good.
important.
Okay.
Brilliant question. One of the most brilliant
Oh, good.
questions I've been asked.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. As we wrap up, you have to look at that camera, sir.
Hmm.
Someone has been watching you for close to an hour and a half. You want to leave them with a message of encouragement, upliftment, something uplifting.
I'm going to tag on to the fact that we had this wonderful event in our democracy where I think we're one of the very few countries that transitioned from one administration to another with no violence. This is the beauty about Botswana. We have such an opportunity here that I would encourage everybody to take advantage of the new opportunities that are going to present themselves, because my interactions with those in the new administration is we're definitely looking forward and we want to change things for Botswana and for Botswana. And I encourage everybody, please apply yourselves to the best of your ability. Whatever you are doing as a job or whether it's studying, what I find the most disheartening is people's lack of wanting to apply their skills and their brains to the things that they are doing, to make sure that they do them better than anybody else. So I hope that we see really good positive things coming in the next few years.
Wonderful, wonderful. Would you care to give them all your contact details, physical, social media, or otherwise?
Okay. So Dixon-Warren and Associates, which is the firm that I've opened up, is based in Independence Avenue, plot 203, right next door to the museum. In the old Alexander Forbes building there. It's been refurbished. So we're on the ground floor there together with the Ukrainian embassy.
Oh, okay.
So we've got good security, I think. Yes, we have a web address, which is www.dwa.co.bw. We have a LinkedIn page. We are still working on the socials.
The LinkedIn is under your name?
Is under Dixon-Warren and Associates.
Yeah.
We do have a page, yes. Yeah. And I'm on there, yes.
Facebook,
Facebook,
Instagram?
we're still working on. Instagram, I've got a new lady helping me who introduced me to you.
Oh, okay.
So she's also going to help get us a little bit more.
Yeah.
We prefer to receive our inquiries through word of mouth.
Yes.
From people that have said that we've done something good for them, as opposed to being out in your face in the media. So, but
all right. Well, it remains for me, Mr. Nigel Dixon-Warren, to thank you for taking the time out, spending almost an hour and a half with us, and for sharing so generously. I wish you everything of the best, and I have no doubt in my mind you'll continue to succeed, because success leaves clues. And once you've succeeded and you maintain those habits, then you'll continue to succeed. So I wish you the very best, and I wish you Godspeed.
Thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Let me turn to you, dear viewer, and conclude our conversation by saying, please strike that subscribe button. Don't forget. I hope that the information we've shared has been very useful to you, and I do ask that you follow up in all our socials. And again, my book is for sale. Go get it, only $350. And thank you for taking the time out to watch the show. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Congratulations. You did a good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.